So this is it, the end of Fantasy Month, the end of the Millennium. Did you know that in Japan, Phantasy Star IV actually wasn't called Phantasy Star IV, it was just called Phantasy Star End of the Millennium. Believe it or not, 4 was tacked on by Sega of America. And after the dud that was 3, Sega knew that they had to really stick the landing with 4. They put some of the original team members back onto it, and it feels like they knew that Phantasy Star as a series would probably never see another true entry, that there would never be a true follow-up to the first 3 Phantasy Star games. So it really shows with 4. But enough of my ugly mug, let's just get into it. Phantasy Star IV is the best Phantasy Star game. You'd have to search pretty hard to find anyone who thinks otherwise. Maybe some prefer online, but as far as the classic series goes, this is it. This is the Phantasy Star game. It's untouchable. And for obvious reasons, across the board, in every conceivable, measurable aspect, its presentation has been upgraded, modernized even. Think of the other Phantasy Stars as these black and white 1930s moving pictures, where 4 makes that quantum leap into one of those many modern feeling classics from the 70s that are just as easy to watch and relevant today as they were 50 years ago. You gotta be in a certain mood to play the other Phantasy Stars. Your expectations need to adjust so you're okay with being bombarded with old game clunk. 4, on the other hand, is so friendly. It's the kind of game you can sit anybody in front of, regardless of their deposition to old JRPGs, and they'll easily be able to get through and enjoy it. This is a beautiful video game, one of the best looking on the Genesis. Great pixel art will always look pristine, and coming off 3, the towns actually look like towns now. Houses have fully decorated interiors, just things that you would normally take for granted that the previous entries didn't necessarily are all present here. Your walking speed is much faster. The quality of life improvements are staggering, especially when you've just played all of these games back to back to back. It felt good. Playing through Phantasy Star IV felt like a virtual vacation. They also upped their storytelling techniques. Gone are the days of bluish green screens with 2 character portraits facing each other, of being informed of major plot events in nondescript blue text boxes. 4's comic book styled cutscenes are incredible. They're unique to this game, and they get over the emotions they're attempting to convey incredibly well. These giant character portraits and detailed facial animations go such a long way. It doesn't rely as much on subtle world details. Phantasy Star IV is much more overt and direct. Don't get me wrong, there are still plenty of non-obvious story details hidden within its gameplay mechanics and other observable details. It makes great use of the techniques pioneered by Final Fantasy IV just a few years prior, where your character's stats and power levels get across a great deal by themselves. You're Chaz, and the game begins with you not in control of your own party. You're being literally led around by this older female mentor figure named Alys, who is so badass she can walk right through NPCs if she feels like it, spelled differently from the protagonist from the first game. You know you're supposed to be identifying, self-inserting yourself as Chaz because the first thing you see is the tried and true, wake up you lazy bum trope. Normally it's your mom, think Dragon Quest III or Pokemon or Chrono Trigger or RPG Maker Super Dante 2, Mountain Dew Edition. But here it's your business partner, Alys. You're both hunters. She's considered the best hunter, as many NPCs throughout the game will let you know. So you go on your little early game adventures, and it's kind of like having a crush on a girl that's 2 grades above you in school. And that while you're hanging out, she's clearly the one in control, but you're still trying to impress her, so she knows that you belong. I mean, after all, Alys is only a couple levels above me. This could happen. Then about 40 minutes into the game, you meet Rune, and he's like when that friend invites her older male friend over that she's clearly interested in. You're 13, she's 15. Now there's this other guy who's 17 and has a car. Like, how the fuck are you gonna compete with that? The answer is you're not, because Rune is level fucking 17, and I'm only 4. She's the one with the buff spells, propping your ass up in boss battles. But slowly over time, you'll catch up and even surpass Alys. And when Rune joins later in the game, he's not even any stronger than you anymore. It makes you feel good. Instead of your levels just going up in a vacuum, there's character benchmarks. You're able to compare yourself to them along the way. It's all very good textbook stuff. I recommend watching this video by Yaz Minsky, which is 34 minutes of examining this exact topic in much greater detail. He comes at this game from a completely different perspective as me, and it's fascinating to watch somebody view this era of gaming as something so old and decrepit that he would need to preface his takes as much as he does. You'll understand what I mean if you watch the video. It's very well done, and I'll link it below. There are a few things that are so forward-thinking that you would never expect them in a 16-bit RPG. For example, party talk is unheard of. You know, the option in the menu where you can listen to your party members speak amongst themselves. I have reviewed dozens of RPGs from this era, and this is the only game I've played with anything like that. There's also a completely optional job board at the Hunters Guild, which only has 8 quests, but at least that's something. And it might not sound like much, but while commonplace and even somewhat expected now, was another thing that was completely unheard of in 1993. There are also a huge amount of interactions hidden behind inspecting objects. Examine everything. 9 out of 10 times, nothing special will happen, but those times when it does makes the whole process worth it. For example, examining the doctor's fiance's wardrobe, or anything really in Alys's and Chaz's house. Yeah, they live together. That's strange. Phantasy Star IV takes place in a world where the Game Gear exists, apparently. I wonder if maybe Phantasy Star Gaiden and Adventure exist in this universe too. Maybe that's what those games were supposed to be. They're in-universe Phantasy Star video games. Those are what the children of the Algo Star system play. The whole story exists in the shadow of the older games. Motavia is post-apocalypse from 2. However, Dezois seems to have mostly recovered from the mining crisis and the traditional 1,000 years in between titles. Oh, and this is the last chance I'm going to be able to bring this up, so I might as well. In this game, and in a few others, it's Dezolis with an L instead of Dezois like I've been saying every time. And sometimes Motavia is shortened to just Moda, and character names aren't always consistent either. I've just been kind of saying whichever term I like the most. In reality, these are likely localization inconsistencies from game to game, but I like to imagine it's just the language of these people evolving. It has been 1,000 years after all, and we sure as shit wouldn't be able to understand English-speaking people from 1023, so Dezois adding an L doesn't bother me all that much, and I like the name Dezois more than Dezolis. So no L when I say it. Anyway, Alys is worshipped as an ancient hero, and all the past parties who saved the world get their due. The people of Phantasy Star IV are incredibly history conscious, the exact opposite of the populace from 3. I do applaud this game for working 3 into its canon, because it would have been easy to just write that off as nothing, as something that this other team made, so it doesn't count. But they didn't do that. You make your way through this dungeon, which is a direct reference to the scaffolding metallic areas from 3. Then you find that you've actually been walking through the spaceship from 3, which crash landed here, poetically stating that everything that happened in that game doesn't matter because they all died in a horrible spaceship crash anyway. Except for Ren. He's that transforming android who's in your party for 95% of 3. It's as if 4 is saying, here's the one and only cool thing from the last game, take him and enjoy. He doesn't transform anymore, but I appreciate the gesture. You fight this rogue AI called Daughter, as in daughter brain. Get it? It's a solid joke. And this game can be funny at times. 4 is a more lighthearted, gentler Phantasy Star. There's little to no grinding, and remember how I complained about both Phantasy Star 2 and 3's dungeons for different reasons? In 4 they're simple, but not as brain dead as 3. They're more like what you'd expect from a typical Final Fantasy or any other JRPG. The whole game is dense, too. My playthrough was only 22 hours and 14 minutes, but there's quite a bit jammed into that space. It's also blazingly fast and maintains that pace through the whole game. There's no noticeable sticking points, and normally I would mean all this as a compliment, but In the case of Phantasy Star IV, it's a little too fast, and as a result, I don't think it comes together cleanly. I spoke about this phenomenon in my Lufia 2 video, and I think Phantasy Star IV has a similar issue. You'll hear about your next objective that's supposedly incredibly far away, then you walk for 20 seconds on the world map and you're already there. You'll hear about this super dangerous cave, which is so dangerous that nobody ever comes out alive. And you go in and it's just a simple maze with 2 branching paths. Not even very long ones, and they both lead to treasure chests. Events can feel inconsequential. So many things happen so close together with little to no time for any of it to really sit in. In fairness, the first half of the game I feel is much stronger than the second. They do a fantastic job of building up this world-beating villain in Zio. He blackmails the university president, which is what turns into your call to action at the start of the story. He turns an entire village to stone, sort of a callback to when you fight Medusa in the first game. He has a cult and a church dedicated to worshipping the very ground he stands on. And to top it all off, he even kills off Alys, which is genuinely a well done and heartbreaking scene. See, she doesn't die right away, and the game makes you think that you're going off to find a cure before finally twisting the knife and having her die while sick in bed. But then a couple hours later, you get your revenge by killing off Zio permanently. That's it. He doesn't come back. There's no fake finish to the fight, he doesn't escape, there's no bait and switch, you just go through this dungeon, go up to him, and kill him, and he's gone. This is only 10 hours into the game, and the story has already reached its natural conclusion. The big bad guy you want to defeat is already gone, so the game needs to then start all the way from scratch to create villains for you to care about, and naturally, you're simply not going to. At least you're not going to care nearly as much about the guy they just spent 10 hours building up. Phantasy Star IV eventually devolves into Chaz becoming the IT manager, troubleshooting what's wrong with the algo system. They thought killing Zio would fix everything, but it didn't. So you go to this control satellite, but that doesn't fix anything either. So you go to Dezois, which is having issues of its own. So you go to their weather control station, tinker with that, and it doesn't fix anything. So you just continue chasing these problems throughout the whole game, and it just keeps going. It's the characters continuously guessing what might be wrong, then trying out their plan and having it not fix the issue. And every single time we go through this cycle, it's like we're back to square one and the game has to build something up from scratch again. You don't feel anything near the same level of accomplishment you did in 2, for example. That game builds up to one event. The original as well. Lassic kills your brother in the opening cutscene and you spend the whole game building up to your eventual confrontation with him. The first 2 games build up to one event, it happens, it's awesome, and then the game ends. It's a simple rising action, then a little bit of falling action, and then it ends. But 4 peaks way too early. Its plot diagram is like goes straight up and then it dives straight down and it just kind of waves around for the rest of the game. It tries and fails to build itself up again multiple times after this initial peak, but it just can't get itself going. Don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed Phantasy Star IV from a gameplay perspective, but it's at this point where I stopped giving a solitary fuck about anything that happened in the story. And my settled thoughts on this game go against the grain a little bit. If you view this as a standalone entity, it's excellent, obviously. If you're going to play one Phantasy Star game, this is the one. But at the same time, as a conclusion to Phantasy Star, it falls a little flat. Sure, it has plenty of Phantasy Star things, more than I could possibly count. Almost every key item is a reference to one of the past games, and it's immaculately crafted, but its plot is so unfocused, way too much for my liking. They bring back Lassic, remember the main antagonist from the first game, for about 2 hours before deciding to move on. Then in the end, it's all Dark Force again. He's back, and it turns out the reason Dark Force keeps returning is because there's this invisible 4th planet in the Algo system, which you can only see if you're holding this MacGuffin, and on that planet is 5 rings that the party has to wear while they're killing Dark Force. Then and only then, if you're wearing the rings, will Dark Force be prevented from reincarnating. I can't put it any other way. That's stupid. That's really stupid, in fact. That was their big idea to end Phantasy Star? That's terrible. And the ending stinks too. Everyone just kind of realizes that their job is done and goes their separate ways. They don't celebrate, there's no sense of camaraderie. Hooray, we just saved the world. Okay, I guess that's it. See you guys at the reunion in 10 years? Yeah? Okay, bye-bye. Phantasy Star IV is a game which kills its only dragon a third of the way in, then is constantly inventing new ones to slay out of thin air. Its character work is miles above anything we've seen from any of the other games, and it's better than almost every JRPG that existed at this time. But I just wish they had better things to do. And this game didn't branch out nearly as much as 2. There are no 4 text adventures. What you get in this specific cartridge is all that there is. If you're a regular viewer, or hell, if you've only watched a Fantasy Month, then you know that I like to do these bullshit high school English class plot and theme analysis type things from time to time. But 4 didn't really give me any ammo to do that. The end of this game, and thus the end of Fantasy Month, left me feeling a little empty. With RPGs, or any narrative-based game, or really any story no matter how it's told, in order to be considered great in my eyes, you can't just crap the bed with the ending. You really need to stick that landing to graduate from being just a pretty good game into one of the best of all time. Phantasy Star IV is as good a game can get with a bad ending. For some, the ending means very little, but for me, that's the largest lasting opinion. I really enjoyed playing this game in the moment. While I was playing Phantasy Star IV, I was thinking that this game was awesome. It's a delight while you're playing it. But when it came time for me to sit down and reflect on what I had just experienced, it didn't hit me in nearly the same way. In fact, the longer I think about this game, the worse my opinion of it gets. I didn't set out, when I was thinking of Fantasy Month, or even just going into this review having previously made the other 6. Or hell, even after finishing the game, I didn't expect to be saying any of this. It was only when I sat down to write this video that I came to these conclusions. I didn't expect to be saying any of this, but alas, here I am. To contrast, Phantasy Star II was a chore. While I was playing that game, my opinion wasn't very high. It's incredibly annoying, and my review isn't all that positive. But the more it simmers, the more I think about Phantasy Star II, the warmer I become to it. I've put that game over more in the subsequent videos than I did in my initial review, and it's for this very reason. Even though far less happens, and it has a much less flashy presentation, even though it's a grind fest, and it's not always very fun, 2 is going to stay with me longer. I'll remember more about 2 than I will 4. This was a great and influential series that Sega ran into the ground, then attempted to give a proper send-off here with 4, and it only kind of half succeeded. My final conclusion is that while Phantasy Star IV is undoubtedly the best game in the series, Phantasy Star II is my favorite. And that's all I have on the whole Phantasy Star series. Shout out to you, the viewer, for making it this far. Shout out to William Robert Lee. Shout out to all the rest of the patrons. That was Fantasy Month, and remember, never trust anyone who needs a haircut. Goodbye.